Welcome to everybody who has joined us on this day. This is our 7th webinar that we're hosting, and what an excellent way to end off this year. I'm Megan Slater, the Learning Solutions Manager for the Western Cape, and it's certainly my pleasure to be able to host you this morning. Just before we kick off, there are some housekeeping rules. We will be putting across 2 poll questions, if you wouldn't mind considering those. The first one is going to be looking at what some of the barriers are to successful succession planning. And then we'd also like your viewpoint on what you consider to be the success factors that stand behind an excellent succession plan. Right at the end, we'll give you an opportunity for Q&A, so please feel free to use the chat box and we'll address those at various points, if not right at the end. So we'd love to get some of your questions and insights on today's topic, which is the 1, 2, 3 of succession planning. Judging by the enormous response, it's certainly clear to me that there's a thirst for knowledge in terms of knowing more about succession planning, as it's instrumental and very strategic part of development and implementation of an important talent management strategy for most businesses. I'm very pleased to be able to be joined today by Eulaine. Eulaine's not only a very valued colleague of mine at iLearn, but she's also been in the industry for over 14 years and is a qualified skills development practitioner. Hi, Eulaine.
Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for hosting me today.
Hi. So fabulous to have you front and center with me. Awesome.
Thank you, Megan. And yes, there was, in fact, a very overwhelming response. And if we have a look at some of the stats on how many organizations in South Africa are, in fact, running a successful planning model in their businesses, I'm not surprised by the thirst for knowledge.
Absolutely, it's going to be epic. Eulaine, let's just lay down the foundations for today's discussion, and for my benefit. What would you say is an easy way, a layman's way, of describing or defining succession planning in an organization?
Well, Megan, essentially it's an employment practice for the future planning of the workforce in an organization, which takes into consideration the leadership structure and how that leadership structure could potentially change over a period of 1 to 5 years. And that would be due to retirement, could be due to promotion, or it could be by exit of the organization by other means. I think the intention of the succession plan is that as these structural changes take place in that period of the 1 to 5 years, the idea is to have a business not being left crippled by the lack of unskilled or inexperienced leaders in the business. But for purposes of clarity for today's session, we'll relate it specifically to the succession planning of leaders. But succession planning doesn't have to start and end there. It most certainly can apply to other critical roles in the organization. It could even apply to, for example, the machine operators in a business.
No, I get that. I've often, and I think just in reading and in preparation for today's session, found that there seems to be, and maybe it's just me, the use of a retirement exit strategy in the same way that people refer to a succession plan. Are those one and the same? Do they fit hand in glove, or are they actually completely different? How would what you've just described be different to a retirement exit strategy for a business?
So a retirement exit strategy and succession planning for promotion or development of individuals in the business are 2 very different things. But the beauty about the toolkit that we formulated is that they can be used for exactly the same. If we have a look at a retirement exit strategy, that's just maybe a fancy way of saying, how are we going to retain the skills of individuals who are going to be retiring in the future? I mean, these are very valuable individuals. A lot of them have been with the organization for very long periods of time. And if we have a look at what's happening in South Africa at the moment, many organizations are, once the individual has retired, they're contracting that person back into the business at 1.5 times their wage. And in my opinion, the investment could be so much spent investing it in formal mentoring programs for the transfer of knowledge to ultimately take place. So effectively, you could use the toolkit or a succession planning model for both of those, but the intention and purpose is different.
Much the same. Okay. Do you have a story that kind of encapsulates some of the thinking around succession planning? I know we've spoken a number of times over this, and when we're consulting with clients, we gather a lot of, discussion with them, and the discussion always leads to a formulation of a great story, and I'm sure you've got those.
Yes, I do. I've got one that I'd like to share a little bit later on also. But for now, and more specific to the retirement exit strategy, it doesn't relate to a client, but I had a cup of coffee with a retired employee from Edcon on Tuesday, and she worked for Edcon for 23 years, and in the last few years of her tenure with Edcon, she was an accounts supervisor, so she managed her own accounts department. And she was sharing with me that there was no formal succession planning strategy or retirement exit strategy in place in the organization that focused on sort of your supervisors or your team leaders, and succession planning was very much more focused on your executives in the business. And what I loved about the story that she told me was that she was passionate about her business unit. She loved the people that she worked with, and took great care of them. And she was concerned closer to her retirement period that what's going to happen to these people? What is going to happen to the hard work that she's put in putting processes and structures in place? So she took it upon herself to introduce an informal mentoring process. And she identified somebody in her business unit in the accounts department, who she then mentored and trained on her day-to-day duties. And when the time came for her to retire, it was like 3 months before her retirement due date. The senior management called her in and said to her, you've worked wonders with this division. It's running so smoothly. And we're a little bit anxious about you leaving. So we need you to help us identify a potential candidate within your team, or maybe help us recruit somebody externally. And she just smiled at them and said, well, you know what, I took it upon myself, and I've done it myself, and I've trained an individual. And as a result, the transition of her exiting the business was smooth, was easy, was effortless. And we're absolutely thrilled with that. And for me, what I took away from that story was her mindset. She didn't have this mindset of not wanting to be replaced. She didn't have this mindset of, this is my department and good luck to the next person who tries to make a success of it. She had the business interest at heart. She had the team's interest at heart. And that for me was a success story of how well mentoring and an informal retirement exit strategy could actually work.
Yeah. That's a great story. That highlights a lot of success, how easily it can be done. And of course, as you say, at the heart of it was a great attitude. I also think one thing to consider is the pitfalls had she not done that. Had there not been an informal or formal retirement plan, what might have happened? So in getting ready for this today, I actually found a video, and I think we're going to be putting that into the chat box for everybody to view at their own leisure. And we can also email it out to all the attendees. It's a video called The Case of the Runaway Talent. And I think it encapsulates everything we've just been talking about to this point. So what are some of the successes of doing it correctly? What might be the pitfalls if you don't? And it certainly helps us understand what the benefits could be for the organization. And that as a jumping point leads me to my next question, which is around the barriers of implementing a succession plan or even a retirement exit strategy that you've illuminated for us already. What are some of the barriers that people are feeling in getting this right?
So in my experience and in a nutshell, in the South African landscape, it would definitely be resources and perception. Now, resources refer specifically to the parties who would be involved in the process and ultimately the champion who would drive the process. And mine relates nicely to the story that I just told in how senior management would view retirement exit strategies or succession plans, how the candidates who've been earmarked for succession, what their mindset is with regards to this, and then also the mindset of the individuals who are going to be either moving up the ladder or moving out of the business. I think it's a good time to break down what some of the steps are. So there's definitely thinking that's involved, or strategizing. So it's your verbal discussions on how the process would pan itself out, and discussions on individuals, obviously. And then there's the formal planning process. There's the documenting of it, and then obviously there's the doing. So if I had to have a look at some of the successful succession planning models that have been delivered into businesses, the role players that they've brought on board were, it was the senior management and the HR team, as well as the division heads who did the thinking and the strategizing. The documenting in particular was done by the HR team, naturally, because they need to keep it for record purposes and for monitoring and tracking. And then the implementation, that was done by all the parties concerned. So the senior management team, they would consult with the individuals who were either exiting the business or were going to move up the ladder. The HR team who measures and monitors the process for the 1 to 5 year period. And then the division heads are quite critical, because they do the mentoring and the coaching, and then they also track the performance of the individual. So that could very well work hand in hand with performance reviews, etc., and be incorporated into that. I do think that it's helpful that we understand where South Africa stands in relation to some of the global trends with regards to barriers. And if you have a look at the slide that's been brought up, can you see that, Megan?
Yes, no, we can see that. Thanks, Eulaine.
Okay. All right, fantastic. So in this slide, on a global, the global trend shows that the largest barrier is the lack of succession planning tools or career development tools. Okay, I think here they would be referring more to systems, that can sort of predefine who the best successor for a potential position would be. But systems can also be very expensive. And it may be a more complex way to start the process in an organization. So the toolkits that we formulated is a far simpler way to formulate that sort of a plan. Naturally, the systems can be onboarded at some point in the organization, but the documented, even an electronic version of the documented process or the toolkit can be used. So the second one was the funding for leadership development. Now, I can understand on a global scale how that could be a challenge, but in South Africa, management or leadership development is a scarce and critical skill across all sectors and across all industries. And fortunately, management is listed as a scarce and critical skill with all of the CETAs. If you have a look at the NSDS 3, there's it highlights management roles, and sometimes the technical specific management roles, for example, IT managers or project managers or marketing managers. But management in general is a scarce and critical skill. And I know by my own experience from being an SDF that CETAs are very ready to fund through the discretionary grant funding system management programs, and in fact cross seaters. So for example, if we have an organization who is short on leaders in the organization, and that organization is a MER-SETA, a levy paying stakeholder, the management qualification may very well sit with services SETA, but still MER-SETA readily funded it because it was a scarce and critical skill. I think
I've seen
so. Sorry, no, absolutely no, that's fine, So the WSP, when formulating your WSP, there are a number of SETAs who also ask about the methodology that was used to come by the skills gaps related to management, and in which case, you know, a formal succession plan that you could submit as evidence if needed.
Fantastic. That makes sense. I think we're going to be launching a poll to the audience now, particularly on the barriers. There we go. So we're asking, what are the barriers that you have experienced in formulating or delivering a succession plan? If you could let us know whether that is a lack of funding, an inability to locate or create a pool of active passive candidates, or a lack of succession planning and career development tools, perhaps. You could consider whether it's in the inability to identify the future talent needs of the company, or a lack of interest from senior executives. I'll give you a moment to submit those, and then we will be talking to those results at the end, insofar as global statistics have in hand. I see we've got a good voting percentage. I'll just give it a moment longer. Okay. Oh, it looks like an even spread between lack of funding and lack of interest, but we can talk to those later. So, Eulaine, I know that succession planning, is an important part, an integral part of a larger talent management strategy. And if you can consider, just while we're waiting on the voting to continue, where in your experience does succession planning sit into the broader talent management strategy? Do you start there? So, is it somewhere in the middle?
So it definitely is part of a talent management strategy, and if it isn't, it definitely should be. And what I did was I took some results from the Top Employers Institute, and they recently released its ranking of the top employers in South Africa for 2020. And these top employers, they have defined a competency framework against which to measure their employees. They've aligned their grading system to this competency framework, although grading system isn't a must-have. And then, for me, most importantly, these organizations have taken their transformation targets seriously. These organizations were evaluated against the following key areas in their talent strategy. I'm going to just read this out to you. It was workforce planning, it was onboarding, learning and development, performance management, leadership development, career and succession management, compensation and benefits, and culture. So you can absolutely. So you can see that succession planning is a proven and necessary employment practice that secures the leadership structure in a business, as well improves the retention of great talent in an organization. I'd also like to make a further comment on the fact that, if we have anybody in the audience who submits employment equity plans and reports, then you would know that there is a section that relates to HR resources that speaks to specifically a succession plan. And yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to just give you an example. I mean, the numeric targets, they have to mean something, the numeric goals. So if you're committing to the Department of Labor to move 50 individuals up the corporate ladder over a period of, say, 3 years, how are you going to achieve that? What is the plan going to look like to do that? What is your strategy going to be? And that would look like a succession plan. or a succession planning model. I mean, it covers the selection, the development, and the placement of the candidates over a specific period of time. And for employment equity purposes, it would be anything between 1 and 5 years, and that's why I keep making reference to that time frame.
Okay. I'm most particularly interested in that the development section, obviously being in education and in training as we are. So that's always of interest to me. And that brings me to my next question insofar as understanding what the forms of development should be, or be considered at least by employees or employers when they're wanting to groom those individuals that have been earmarked for succession and for future roles.
Absolutely, Megan. Now, for me, it's very dependent on every single organization. Some organizations only recruit leaders who have a degree, for example, or a diploma. But I don't believe that there is any one specific way only against which to develop an individual. So in this case, we're going to look at what the 4 levers of learning are, okay, and that is on-the-job training, which statistically is actually going to give you the highest return on training and development. Then there's mentoring, coaching, which comes in very strongly in second place. And then thirdly, the formal component of training, and then naturally self-motivated development. And self-motivated development, again, for me, speaks into the mindset of the individual, how ambitious they are, how prepared to learn they are. That for me is absolutely critical. And if you look at the structure of learnership, which is the 60-30-10%, that's how it's broken up. The 60% is obviously the workplace learning, the on-the-job learning, which is your highest return. And then 20% of the component is classroom-based training, and 10% is the self-motivated development, you know, where they take their own time to do the assignments and use their own initiative to gather evidence, etc. And that is why I remain a very strong advocate of learnerships and how effective learnerships have actually been in the development of individuals in South Africa. Which actually brings me to my next sales story. We're still good for time?
Yes, we're still good for time. Please tell us a story.
Okay, great. So this story relates to an experience that I actually had with a client. They had what's known in the sales world as a rainmaker, and this ambitious, motivated young woman met and exceeded her target month after month, year after year. She did phenomenally well, and she was acknowledged and financially rewarded, etc. But naturally, there was still a little part of her that you know, she didn't want to be a sales consultant, despite her success, for the rest of her life. She wanted to move into a leadership role. So, and the management team was aware of this. So what they did was they believed, I think it was after 4 years, they wanted to reward her by moving her into a sales management position. So they did this, and she was absolutely thrilled, had great rapport with her team. But 3 months into her new position, the figures were down. The sales team seemed to be a little bit unstable. And if I have a look, unfortunately, there wasn't such a happy ending to the story, but if I have a look at why that played out like it did, it's firstly because they didn't effectively equip her to be a leader, building up to the appointment of being a leader in the organization. And secondly, they hadn't identified either 1, 2, or perhaps 3 potential rainmakers who would be able to cover the revenue as she stepped into the leadership role. So as I said, the story didn't have a very happy ending. They moved her back into a consultant position because naturally the bottom line is what counts. And she felt demotivated, and she ended up a competitor. So that's one of the risks that could play itself out if you're not going to formally put in place a plan for an individual that you're going to move into a different position.
Mm-hmm. In fact, that exact scenario that you've kind of just painted for us is in the video that I referred to. And again, we'll put it in the chat box if we haven't already. Please take 5 minutes. I think it's only 4 minutes and 30 seconds odd. It's an animated video which highlights exactly what you've just spoken about. The person in the position in the company who has valuable information and retains a top leading position in the company, who then ends up not being able to lead or is taken away to a competitor as a result of a succession plan that is not properly formulated. I think we're also at the point now, Eulaine, where you're going to talk to us about a slide on leadership development. There we go. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind taking us through this leadership development structure as we see it ahead of us. We will share this with the audience post the event, so no need to screenshot it or take quick scribble notes. We'll make sure that you have the information. But Eulaine, if you could just give us the highlights of what you've put together here in terms of the structure.
Okay, this is very, very much a framework, and I'll take you through it sort of block by block just to unpack it a little bit for you. So naturally, there would be a leadership development strategy in place, and that would be in the form of a document. Who is our key talent? Who are our potential successors? The second block would speak to the implementation process, and this is it would also be in the form of a document, and it would be in a process flow. And the process flow there could go hand in hand with the succession planning toolkit, which is also available as a handout. Okay. The leadership competency framework, which would also be in the form of a document. So those would be the KPIs against those specific leadership roles. What does that individual need to have in place? Do they need to have a formal education, and what level of formal education, years of experience, and in some specific characteristics? If you then move over to the left of the document again, the identification, this is the analysis part, and it's broken down a little bit further. Again, like I said, who are the current and potential leaders? You would do an assessment or gap analysis according to the competency framework. So, if there's HR professionals listening, you will know that a training needs analysis or a skills gap analysis would be done before you submit the workplace skills plan, so that you've got accurate data with which to work and a focused approach to learning. But in this case, you would do a gap analysis not against that individual's current role, but more specifically against a future role, so that you understand where the developmental gaps would be. And you would formulate a career path and a career and succession planning for that individual. And then assessments and or profiling, and you could go as far as understanding the success of that specific business unit and where the shortfalls were, so you could analyze success of business units. The next step would be the intervention, design and selection process of the selection from the 4 levers of learning. What is it that you're going to apply? There is always going to be, for best practice purposes, on-the-job training and mentoring and coaching. And then you would select which programs it is that you would select. So what I've done is I used an organogram of an organization who had team leaders, supervisors, and then frontline management, or some organizations refer to them as superintendents. And my recommendation to them was that we do a progression of learning. So we would take them from the management NQF3, then onto an NQF4, and then onto an NQF5. So it becomes lifelong learning, which is something that we want to instill in our employees. Then, apart from the formal accredited learning components, I think it's always healthy to throw in business etiquette, reporting skills, emotional intelligence. There is a huge demand for emotional intelligence. We're currently rolling out for a number of leaders in a large organization an emotional intelligence program specifically to deal with the challenges and the recovery from the COVID period. And then lastly on that block is the coaching and mentoring, both, and you can do that both internally and externally. Then critical to the process would be communication within the organizations to all the parties concerned, naturally having received buy-in from senior management on the first 3 layers of that document, and then individuals about what is planned. You also have a great opportunity then to transfer this information through to your employment equity committee for consideration, as well as your skills development committee. And then you would implement the intervention. So this gives you a very comfortable 3 to 5 year training plan, succession plan, leadership development plan. All 3 of those can be tackled by applying what you see in this document. And I'm not going to leave out the last component, because for me this is also very, very critical, is the feedback and review. You can't expect something like this to just grow legs and run away with itself, because actually it will. So, but you need to, on either a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, annual basis may be a little bit long, but feedback and review, constant feedback and review on how the process is carrying itself out.
Absolutely necessary, and it also give opportunity to, in the review phase, make any adaptations that have become necessary. I mean, a plan is only as good as it's implemented. So very, very vital. I love that slide. I think it contains a real nugget of information on which to build a good story, and also brings us to our next polling question around what the audience considers to be the 2 most vital ingredients for a successful succession strategy. Would that be culture? Would it be the fact that it's documented? In other words, it's laid out in a formal plan. You need to secure buy-in and support. Is that the most key ingredient, or is it just simply communication? If our audience would let us know their thoughts around those 4 choices, selecting 2, and we can then share the results and have a discussion as soon as that's closed. Okay, I'll just give it a few minutes. All right. In the meantime, Eulaine, I see there are a number of people that have come through from the audience with some really, really great questions. So thank you for that. Can I continue with some of those?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
Awesome. There's Selma, who's come through asking, is there something to be said for a changing world of work when it comes to succession? She says she's finding for the talent involved in this process an almost don't care attitude towards EE, WSP, BBEE, which are the tools. Are these tools just transactional, or have we lost the employee experience in the gambit of succession planning practice? Very key elements for discussion in that question, but let's just take it from the top down. When it comes to the compliance requirements, are we giving enough attention to employee experience?
So I think a critical word in there was transactional, and what it should be, that is transformative. So I honestly believe, and in my experience, organizations have been under extreme pressure to meet compliance targets for BEE, for employment equity, in particular those 2. When that plan is formulated and put together, I don't think that transformation is actually taken into consideration. So it becomes a checkbox exercise so that you don't get into trouble and so that you can continue doing business. If you're going to take a transactional approach, it's going to put your business at risk. If you don't have a plan, in which to meet those targets ultimately. You can't expect the HR team to put together the employment equity plan and then still do whatever it is that they want to actually deliver on that plan. That's going to rock for senior management. So the question that the HR team should be saying, senior management, this is what we've committed to in terms of BEE and employment equity. How are we going to meet those targets so that it's not transactional, but rather transformative?
And on the back of that question, I thought I would just share the results for the last poll that we did. There were 82% of the attendees that voted, so thank you. But out of the 82, there is an overwhelming response to the key ingredient being securing that buy-in and support from senior management. And that on the back of you saying that we need to be more transformative than transactional, leads me to think that securing that buy-in and support is more on the end of transformative than transactional. So I'm very pleased to see those results. What are your insights there, Eulaine?
The results are very reflective of what is happening in South Africa, without a doubt. I think initially I said resources and mindsets specific to senior or executive management. And let me give you a little bit of guidance in terms of what to do with that. HR professionals, it's your responsibility to educate senior management. It's not a key focus of theirs to deliver on the HR strategy. So educate them. There's a presentation that's also available as a handout, and it was designed specifically to educate and to obtain buy-in, to help the senior management teams understand what the risks are, to help the senior management teams understand that the leadership development plan for the individuals can fit into your workplace skills plan or your skills development strategy. So it's not going to be an extra expense, that there is funding available. And I'd be more than happy if anybody wanted to, I would be more than happy to go through that presentation with them, just to guide them in how to position it with their senior management teams. But please educate your senior execs, and then do what you can from there.
I see also quite close to the discussion we had earlier with the slide around leadership and development strategy, that documenting it seems to be the second key ingredient from the audience. And I think that's what you were saying earlier, Eulaine, in those 3 top blocks of your slide, is to get it in writing, put in the various gateways to moving on, and make sure that your strategy is well formulated and documented. So again, I'm pleased with those results because it does show and tie in to our earlier discussion. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just take one more question.
Great.
Sorry, I jumped in there. Let's have a look. A comment from Tanya, who says that succession planning models need to be honest about the fact that the solution is aimed for the person to not leave, but companies who cannot manage employees' expectations on promotion and perceived growth within their roles would struggle to successfully implement this. Do you have any thoughts on Tanya's view?
If I'm correct in understanding the question, it's really about managing the expectations of the individual who's been earmarked.
Correct, and also the fact that the succession planning models need to be honest about the fact that the solution is to retain people in as much as it is to grow people upward and give them an upward trajectory growth in the business. And so we're actually planning for growth on the one hand, but we're also planning to retain critical skills within the business. And maybe that's a pitfall or a struggle for some of the companies.
Yes, absolutely. So organizations should ideally have a retention strategy in place. It doesn't have to be to a very large scale, but just a little bit of an indication around what they do with the individuals who feel that they want to move vertically or horizontally in the business. Managing the expectations of the individual sometimes speaks to managing their expectation of salary increases, etc. But I'm going to go back again to mindset or perception. So the candidate who's going to be earmarked for succession needs to understand that it's going to happen over a period of time. So if you're going to take the sales consultant and move that individual into a sales manager position, it doesn't happen overnight. And depending on what the gaps are in terms of development, it could take 1 year, it could take 2 years, and it could take 3 years. And like going to university, there's a lot of extra work that you need to put in. You've got to be prepared to work towards that position. In actual fact, for leaders, you need to be displaying leadership characteristics and attributes before you're even formally appointed into that position. So I think when you're selecting that candidate, attitude, mindset has to be the first component before you look at gaps and a lack of formal education, perhaps.
Okay, and hard skill gaps. You know, we come out of university with all the theoretical knowledge and we're ready to take on the world, but those soft skills are things that we need to hone and develop over time. And that we certainly find in reading a lot about learnership and development in the 21st century is the emphasis that now is being placed on critical thinking, emotional intelligence, the idea of systems thinking now replacing the sort of a lot of the theory that we kind of had at university. So good points there, Eulaine. I've also got Rosalie on.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to add one thing there, Megan. I think it came up in the first question about how the workplace is evolving. It is going to be ever evolving, which means that your plan needs to be ever evolving. There's a whole lot of new skill sets required, like you mentioned now, related to not the lockdown period only, but to the fourth industrial revolution. So it does need to evolve with regards to how the business is growing and to how the world is changing around us.
Excellent. I see a question here from Rosalie, and that also brings to mind, we've been talking a lot about the bigger organizations and we keep using those, you know, organization, and that brings to mind the enterprise type client. But what about small businesses? How do small businesses put together a succession plan when they don't have this talent pool within the business already?
So
they might not have the talent in place.
Yeah, and a much smaller staff complement. And I actually faced exactly this question with a family-owned business who also had a small staff complement. And you know, the son wasn't the ideal candidate to bring into the business. The daughter wasn't interested. And there you may look at recruiting externally. But in my opinion, I think documenting the KPIs or analyzing the roles that are critical in the business, and then understanding the sort of skill set you need to fill those would go a long way in preparing for the future. I do think that the smaller organizations are at a little bit of a disadvantage because of a smaller talent pool and a smaller staff complement. But it doesn't mean that you can't for it.
No, absolutely. And there I myself would personally advocate for the learnerships from an unemployed market. And I'm, of course, very passionate about building in that pipeline of new talent, whether that be into an organization, into a smaller company, SME development, or even just generally into a sector. I always see that is a solution that is readily available to all organizations or skills development levy paying stakeholders. I think we've got time for a few more questions. Let's have a look. Is there something to be said? Okay, we've done that one. Interesting here from Michaela. Michaela wants to know in how we communicate to other employees that someone is chosen as a successor and will be developed, to avoid that sense of demotivation from say, another team member.
Okay, all right, yes, and to put it simply, it's something that I was also faced with previously. Organizational culture is quite key here, but in order to alleviate huge amounts of animosity and conflict in the organization, I think that you could perhaps open up applications for anybody who may be interested. You may find that the candidate that you've got may not even be interested in the position. So you could start before actually marking. You know, you might have somebody in mind, but before formalizing the process, open up applications to that position, and the individual needs to motivate as to why they're the best candidate for the role. So you can create a platform on which to do this. You are going to have difficult conversations. There are going to always be people who are going to push back. So prepare yourself for that.
Certainly, indeed, I understand that completely. We did have a look at one of the results, but just let's go back to the other poll for a moment. We looked at some of the barriers to succession planning, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on these results. So the audience has let us know that for the most part, the lack of succession planning and career development tools, in fact, has been the biggest barrier for them. Second to that is the lack of interest from senior executives. And then third is the lack of funding for leadership development. How does that relate or match up to what the global trends or statistics tell us? Do you have any ideas?
Yes, absolutely. So, strangely enough, at 33%, the lack of succession planning and career development tools on a global scale was a number one. Globally, the lack of funding for leadership development came in, but here we see that lack of interest from senior executives, which also speaks to the previous poll, is also highlighted again.
Interesting that those
focus. Absolutely.
Okay, let's have a look. Do we have time for one more question, Eulaine? Yes, we do. I have a question. Can you please dwell a little bit more on mentorship or the informal thereof? Because I think some employees may feel that certain individuals are being groomed for other positions and that it could be seen as unfair advantage over your colleague. Very similar to the question that Michaela had. So how do we have those difficult conversations? I know you mentioned that we could open up an application process. What else could we be doing? I mean, to ensure, do we have an open culture around, you know, the succession plan? Is that open for comment from people, or is it just set up by management?
All right, so to answer your question, the formulation of a strategy, succession planning strategy, should involve senior management. The selection of candidates and how that is done, they should also be involved in the process, and that's where the applications, for example, would come in. But to break down the question that we've just had into understanding mentoring and coaching in a formal and an informal process. So a formal process would have an agenda and a specific outcome in mind. Informal mentoring and coaching absolutely can be seen as biased, but it may also very well be done against, for example, a skills gap. So let's Excel, for example. Eulaine is now in a management position. She's got to do some reporting, but she's done Excel intermediate, and she is going to need some help to learn how to do pivot tables, and more specifically how to relate those to the reports that she's got to submit as a manager. So, you know, then you have maybe a senior manager or a peer spending considerable time with her to help her get these pivot tables right. I'm just, you know, that's just a random example, but and it could apply to specific skill set required. It could in fact even apply to how somebody communicates, you know, within the business. I know that if somebody came and said, you know, I'd like to mentor you in your communication techniques used in the business, I wouldn't be too excited about it, but I would, you know, I would go ahead with it. But I absolutely can see how that could create a little bit of conflict in giving appearance of bias. But in that case, the mentor should make it known. You know, it should be a transparent process, whether it's formal or informal. That this is the reason I'm doing it. I'm doing it because Eulaine needs to brush up on her pivot table skills. So I hope the question.
The key element for me there was transparency, and I think if you look at those polls and you work towards getting the buy-in from senior management, I think the next level is then open and transparent about the process that got you there, and certainly what the succession plan looks like, not just for individuals, maybe on a department level or an organogram level. You know, you could at regular intervals make sure that it's clearly understood where the succession areas are being brought into the business as part of a larger talent development strategy. So I think that's great. Sadly, we've run out of time, Eulaine. It's absolutely fantastic talking to you on this level, and I thank you for your time. I thank you for your expertise and guiding us through all of that. We will certainly make your slides available to all attendees. And I don't know if you have any passing comments, last comments before we log off, but just a huge amount of thanks from me and on behalf of everybody else attending.
No, thank you very much, Megan, and I hope that it was valuable. And again, please reach out if you've got, you know, if you need to have a half an hour strat session or just run a couple of more questions by me. I'm more than happy to assist. It's something that I'm really very passionate about. I've seen the successes. I've seen the transformation happen in both people and in businesses. But I want to encourage you to do your own research too. I'm not sure whether or not it's the link is actually shared, but there's something that I've had a look at. It's from Sigma Assessments. And it identifies the do's and don'ts and 10 of the biggest planning mistakes. You know, if you can address the mistakes at the planning phase already, you're saving yourself a lot of time and trouble. But do your research, find something that's going to be a good fit for your organization. Nobody knows the business better than what you do, you know, in comparison to maybe Megan and I. So find something that fits for your business and be the pioneer. Take charge of this process and deliver it into the business. Make a difference.
I was just going to say, be the difference maker, lead the charge. Yes. Thanks, Eulaine. Love talking to you. Even though you're a colleague of mine on this level, I appreciate how much experience you have and how much you know. And it was just getting great, absolutely great getting that from you today. I will see you on the other end of the camera again soon. But thank you again. I wish you well. Thank you to everybody for attending.
Thank you so much.
We've had an overwhelming response, and we promised to get everything through to all attendees via email. So just make sure if you don't receive the handouts and the video links, etc., from us, please be in touch, because I think you'll find that super valuable in your journey and in your way forward. Wishing you all well. Hope you have a wonderful day further. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.